Last month's general elections in Zimbabwe seem to have created somewhat of a diplomatic tiff with its northern neighbour, Zambia. Zanu-PF Treasurer General Patrick Chinamasa may have stoked more tensions as he has directed more insult towards Zambia's President Hakainde Hichilema. Hichilema recently reiterated his country's support of the findings by the SADC election observers that the polls fell short of regional standards. For a better understanding, I had a conversation with the Executive Director at Southern African Centre for Constructive Resolution of Disputes, Boniface Cheembe.
The seeming tension between Zambia and Zimbabwe is an extension of the geopolitics that are currently characterizing the world, seemingly the divide between the West and the rest of the West and the East, or democracies versus authoritarian governments around the world. So they are pretty much along those divides, and they have largely been influenced by the preliminary findings that Dr. Nevas Mumba, who was the head of the SADC election observer mission, did give out to the press following the conclusion of the voting process in Zimbabwe. Of course, some of the findings did not sit well with the leadership of the Zanu-PF, and unfortunately Dr. Mumba was seen as an extension of that geopolitical divide that is currently characterizing the world, as somebody who was trying to influence the results or influence the perception, if you will, around the Zimbabwe elections in a direction that was not in line with the Zanu-PF leadership, and in a direction that would seemingly want to more or less bring about some kind of regime change, seemingly in the Republic of Zimbabwe. So it is basically the initial preliminary results and the language that was used by the head of the SADC election observer mission. And of course, what is key to note is that this was not the final report. It was not the final findings, but rather preliminary findings. And that has since led to followers of both leaders of President Emmerson Mnangagwa and President Hakainde Hichilema to engage in an exchange of words, starting with one of the Zanu-PF officials who made comments that were circulating on social media to the extent that perhaps Zimbabwe was aware of how the former Republican president, Dr. Patrick Chinamasa, passed on, and that knowledge can equally be utilized going forward.
Now, did former President Nevas Mumba overstep, do you think, in that report and articulation of some of those issues?
Well, Dr. Nevas Mumba, from where we stand, he was talking from what he presented. He came out as speaking what he was being fed by the different witnesses that they spoke to, number one. Number two, by what they observed themselves as they went around their business as an election observer mission. Should the style have been different? I think this is a reflection that SADC will have to undertake themselves at the point of compiling the final report and be in a position to communicate to SADC, to the Republic of Zimbabwe, as to whether certain things were not done correctly. But for the most part, from where we stand, it looks as though Dr. Nevas Mumba was communicating exactly what was observed and exactly what they had been communicated to by witnesses. Now, we don't have first-hand information as to whether that is the case or not. We are assuming that that is the case, and we hope that that is the case. Our hope and appeal is that going forward, and in an effort to ensure that SADC remains in good standing, Zambia and Zimbabwe remain in good standing, if at all at any one point SADC does feel that they overstepped their boundaries and that there is something that they did not do correctly, they should be magnanimous enough to be able to point those out to the people in Zimbabwe, to the government of the Republic of Zimbabwe, and if need be, apologize. But that is something that can be taken forward, especially at the point of presenting the final election Observer Mission report. And mind you, what Dr. Mumba presented was simply a preliminary report. The report has to go through various stages of approval with and it has to be given the due diligence that it deserves. We wait to see, and we look forward to having the final report produced by the SADC Election Observer Mission.
Now, Boniface, I'd imagine when you speak about it's only a preliminary report, that you're suggesting that Dr. Nevis Mumba might have been off the mark, or certainly those that put the report together might have been off the mark. Is this what you're suggesting?
Well, what I'm suggesting is that sometimes what you have in a preliminary report may not be reflected in the final report. And the preliminary report is simply supposed to give you a synopsis, an understanding of what could have transpired. It is possible that certain mistakes could have been made, and at that point, those will be clarified and will be cleaned up in a final report. This is why it's very important that we wait for the final report, because that will give us an indication of the extent to which the preliminary report was accurate and was representative of the work that the SADC Election Observer Mission report did present. Should there be a huge difference, SADC will have an obligation to explain to the people of SADC and to the people of the Republic of Zimbabwe, and indeed to all stakeholders from around the world,